evening. Tonight's video features true, scary, cryptid stories. I will be joined by Southern Cannibal. I want to thank this guy from the bottom of my heart. The work he put into our collaboration is amazing. He is so talented, and I already know that he's well on his way to huge things. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you, man, and you're a great friend to have. So thanks again for the opportunity. Thanks for joining me. Make sure to subscribe to Southern Cannibal. I will leave a link to his channel in the description box below at the end of the video, guys. Be sure to head over to his channel as soon as the video is over. Subscribe. Just like I always say to stay sinful, go over to Cannibal Station and make sure you stay hungry. Let's begin.
This is my father's story written from his perspective. It follows an experience he had with a skinwalker on the Navajo Reservation. When I was about 11 or 12, we lived in a small house made of mud and stone, a lot like our house now. It was two of my brothers and I in the house. Everyone else had gone to the Jamas feast and left us to tend the sheep. We were getting ready for bed when we heard the dogs going crazy outside. Thinking it was nothing more than coyotes howling in the distance, we told them to be quiet. We began to drift off into sleep, and then the dogs would not shut up. Somehow I was able to go to sleep for a few hours. Then I woke up very late in the night. It was very quiet and still in the house, save for my brothers snoring and breathing. I realized I needed to use the outhouse and woke up my brother to take me there. He teased me about being scared, which I certainly was. I won't deny it. We went out with our flashlight to the outhouse. The dogs began with their crazed barking out in the sagebrush, going from one place to the next. My brother went first and I waited outside for him. While waiting, I tried to follow the dogs with my flashlight. Suddenly, there was a very loud whine from one of the dogs. Then everything went quiet again. It was really too quiet for that time of year. Not even the sheep were making noise. Suddenly, I heard a few of the dogs going completely mad by the truck. When I looked over, there was this man. He was unbelievably tall, leaning one arm on the cab roof of the truck. He was looking at the dogs for a little, and then suddenly kicking one of them. They all scattered in different directions. The thing looked up at me and I saw its face. It had a pure white face, like a full moon, two burning red eyes, and a slight smile that was pure black. I could not move or make a sound. It began to walk towards me with long strides until it finally towered over me. All I began to see was a dark red, like the color of the blood when you cut the throat of a sheep. I kept getting deeper and deeper into its eyes. I could faintly hear my brother coming out of the outhouse. With this, the thing looked up at him. Reality came rushing back to me. I noticed that my brother was too distracted with his buckle to realize what was going on. I noticed this thing's long hands hovering just inches from my head. Its skin was black ash, and he smelled like a bloated dead animal in the summer. I was still unable to move or speak. The skinwalker began to move towards my brother. Finally noticing this figure, my brother became paralyzed as I was. Closer and closer it drew, reaching an arm out towards my brother's head. Something finally snapped in me and I became unbearably angry. I broke from the trance and lunged at the skinwalker, raising my arms like a wild animal, baring my teeth at it. A growl came out that I never knew I could make. I became more and more angrier at the thing that was trying to hurt us. It kept a smile at first, but the angrier I got, the more the smile faded. Finally, with everything I had, I began to make this primal roar at it. It fell backwards and ran into the night. Looking back at me, its eyes were dim and dull, its smile now long since gone. The next morning, the family returned home from the feast. After relaying the story to my parents, they quickly hired a medicine man.
This story was told to me by one of my good friends, who's of Navajo descent on her father's side. It happened several years ago when she was spending time, the last 2 weeks of summer, visiting relatives on a reservation in New Mexico. And this is by far one of the creepiest things I've ever heard. My friend Jessie was 12 at the time and playing outside with her cousins. They were tossing a frisbee around, and one of the younger kids threw it too hard. It flew over the fence and was swallowed up by a small grove of parched bur oak trees. Jessie, being the eldest, went to retrieve it, leaving her 11-year-old cousin Ellie in charge until she got back. The sun was setting, lighting up the sky in brilliant shades of orange as Jessie made her way over to the grove. After some poking around, she found the frisbee caught in one of the tree's branches. As she climbed, she began to sing an old Navajo song, but paused when her body suddenly went cold. That's exactly how Jessie described it to me. Cold, as if she'd been dunked in ice water. You know that annoying, scary story cliche of feeling like you're being watched? Well, it's only cliche because it's true. Jessie could feel a pair of eyes following her, even when she looked around and saw nothing. Seriously creeped out, she grabbed the frisbee and ran back to her grandmother's house, just in time to see the old woman step onto the porch and call for the kids to come inside. The true horror didn't start until several hours later. Jessie, her cousin Ellie, and Ellie's little sister Clara were asleep in their grandmother's guest room when Jessie woke to the strangest sound she'd ever heard. She described it to me as a cross between radio static and the noise an old movie reel makes. At first it sounded distant, but after a minute or two, Jessie realized it was getting closer. Beside her, Ellie rolled over and muttered, "What is that?" "Don't know," Jessie whispered. The girls waited, holding their collective breath. By now, the sound was right outside the window, and Jessie realized it was singing. At this point in her retelling of the story, Jessie went white and began glancing over her shoulder. She told me the song was the exact same one she'd been singing in the tree grove earlier. "It sounded so wrong," she said, rubbing her arms as if cold breeze had rushed by her. "Remember when we listened to that clip of the very first recording of a human voice? How weird it sounded?" When I nodded, Jessie added, "It was like that, but a little clearer. Somehow that made it even worse." Jessie and Ellie were both terrified, while Clara, unawares, slept on. Through the thin blue curtain over the window, they could see the dark shadow of something peering in at them. To this day, Jessie can't explain what motivated her to get up and see for herself, since she was scared shitless. Ignoring Ellie's protest, she slid out of bed and walked across the room on shaky legs. As soon as she drew back the curtain, she regretted her decision. Staring back at her was the most horrifying creature she'd ever seen. It had the head of an emaciated deer, with antlers like dead tree branches, and eyes so black they seemed to absorb the faint silver moonlight. It had a scrawny humanoid body, with abnormally long arms and legs, and as Jessie stood there, caught in its hideous gaze, it raised a clawed hand and scratched at the window with a horrible screeching sound that made her skin crawl. It was Ellie's scream that jolted Jessie out of her terrified stupor. She stumbled back from the window and landed on the carpeted floor. Clara woke up and began screaming too. Then their grandmother ran in and turned on the light. The thing at the window had vanished, leaving behind 3 long scratches in the glass and 3 terrified little girls. Jessie's grandmother managed to calm the hysterical children enough so they could tell her what had happened. As she listened, her age-weathered face became progressively paler. She hustled the girls downstairs to the living room and made up a bed for them on the couch. She then sat by them all night, and whenever one of them asked her what was going on, the old woman simply shook her head. Needless to say, Jessie and her cousins didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Jessie's grandmother announced that everyone was to stay inside that day. No arguments. She looked so shaken nobody dared protest. Around noon, she called for a medicine woman to come and bless the house. Later, after the woman left, Jessie marched into the kitchen where her grandmother was loading the dishwasher. "Tell me what that thing was," she said bluntly. Her grandmother sighed and motioned for Jessie to sit down. "You have heard the legend of the Skinwalkers, yes?" Jessie frowned and nodded, vaguely recalling the story. "So that was a skinwalker?" Her grandmother nodded. "Yes." "Grandma," said Jessie as a light dawned, "I think it overheard me singing in the tree grove yesterday." Her grandmother's dark eyes narrowed. "Why do you say that?" "Because it was singing that same song. You know the lullaby you used to sing me when I was little?" Her grandmother was silent for a long time before whispering, "You are a very lucky girl, Jessica. But luck has its limits. From now on, you must be more careful." The look in the old woman's eyes as she spoke those words still haunts Jessie to this day. As I said earlier, that was years ago, 7 to be specific. Jessie has returned to the reservation many times, each without incident, but she has never set foot in that tree grove again, and probably never will. Jessie's grandmother died this past March, at the age of 87, and Jessie later moved in with her aunt for the summer, so she could help clean up the old house, which the family was going to rent out. She had been there for about a week when I went down there to visit her. On my first night, we sat on the porch and drank some beers. I found my eyes drifting towards the tree grove. So that's where it all happened. Jessie shuddered and nodded. "Yep, tomorrow I'm taking you to the medicine woman, and I'm going to have her bless you. Is that really necessary?" The look Jessie gave me nearly turned me to stone. You think nothing will happen to you because you're white, but when you're in Navajo territory, you're in Skinwalker territory. Take caution. I nodded. Yes, that night I swore I heard radio static outside the house. When I brought it up to Jessie the next morning, she didn't speak, but grabbed my arm and practically dragged me to the medicine woman where I was blessed. Nothing happened for the rest of the trip, and I went back to the city unscathed. I didn't post this here with the intention of teaching a moral, but if I suppose there is something to be learned from the story of the singing skinwalker, it's that there are things out there we can't explain. The look in Jessie's eyes when she recounted her experience told me everything I need to know. What she saw truly horrified her, and all I can say is, I'm grateful I didn't have to go through it myself. I don't consider myself to be a particularly suspicious person. Okay, sure, I get a kick out of the horoscope once in a while. My boyfriend and I like to humor the idea that spirits and poltergeists exist, and how we'd haunt people when we died and came back as ghosts. In fact, my boyfriend refuses to go anywhere near a Ouija board. Refuses to even think of it. I blame all the crummy horror movies he watches. Why even tempt it, he'd say. Why would you want to taunt evil ghosts like that? Ghosts never play fair, and if you piss one off, you're screwed. I don't think he was ever serious, just precautionary, but maybe he was right. God, this all happened so long ago, but I'm still shaken. Can barely write about it now without my nerves acting up. Okay, here it goes. A few weeks ago, my mom, sis, and I went to Colorado for an entire week on vacation. We were going to drive all over the state, visit parks and go horseback riding, and whitewater rafting, and so much more. I was excited and I sorely needed a break from work anyway. We drove 16 hours out there, spent our first day rafting down the rivers. After an exciting day, we drove to a ranch house to go horseback riding. We got there at sunset, so it was too late to ride, but we had all next day to ride the trails and see the sights. The ranch was dumpy, all run down with scraps of steel everywhere, and the shoddy cabins that we were staying in were in desperate need for repair. I swear the roof over our shack of a cabin was a giant piece of drywall with shingles stapled to the top. My sister and I thoroughly checked the place for spiders and bugs before we even thought of bringing our luggage inside. It was only for the night, I reassured myself. Just one night in a dumpy shack on a rock-hard bed that probably had bed bugs under the sheets. I shuddered at the thought. My mom tried to cheer us up. She had brought skewers and a pack of giant beef hot dogs to roast over the communal fire pit. Happy to get out of the shack, my sister and I made a cozy fire, and soon a few other people from other cabins came out to sit around the fire and roast s'mores and share stories. We talked about where we were from, where we were going, and our adventures along the way. Pretty soon the stories turned into tall tales and urban legends, and the sort of stuff you'd usually tell around a bonfire. That's when I spoke up. I love stories, especially scary ones. And hey, we're out west. We're in Native American territory. Why not liven the place up with my favorite Indian myth, the legend of the Skinwalkers? Now, for those who don't know, Skinwalkers are considered very evil very dangerous beings. They were humans who gained the ability to take on the form of an animal by wearing its skin, usually through very dark and taboo magic. I knew all this and told my story. Who doesn't love a good ghost story? Everyone seemed to be enjoying it. I admit I took some creative liberties with it, really just retelling an old werewolf story, but with a skinwalker instead. I bullshitted a lot of the story, really, and added a few things that weren't in the mythos at all. I gave our beloved frightening skinwalker wide, crazed eyes with pinpoints for pupils with a matching insane smile. I made the skinwalker horribly misshapen with swollen joints and arms that were too long, and legs that were too short, and a head that never sat straight on its shoulders. I made it as terrifying as I could imagine. No one minded. They actually really liked it, and a man from Kentucky admitted the visuals alone were enough to creep him out. Victory in my book, if you ask me. And once I was done, everyone decided it was getting really late. Our firewood was dwindling, and it was a good time as any to turn in for the night. We packed up our skewers and s'mores, doused the fire, and headed to our little shacks. I tossed and turned a lot trying to fall asleep. Couldn't get comfortable on that damn bed. The rock was probably cozier than that mattress, so against my better judgment, I got out of bed and walked around the cabin. I reasoned that if I stayed up late enough, I would be so tired that I would fall asleep, no matter what I was laying on. I think I briefly contemplated sleeping on the floor. I wasn't that desperate yet. It was pitch black outside. No lights from any nearby street lamps. No car headlights. Hell, not even the cabin lights were on. And I don't remember seeing a single star. It was a bit creepy, but I shrugged off the shiver creeping up my back as simply the cold tile floor making me shake. I did, however, find it odd there weren't any lights at all on the property. You'd think there'd be a floodlight on the horse stables or the main office, but no, nothing. This was really weird. I stepped outside in my flimsy foam flip-flops to get a better look. I could barely make out the ranch. For some stupid fucking reason, I decided to go walking around. Eventually my eyes adjusted where I could see well enough to move around. I paced up and down the road where the cabin sat, and circled around to the fence and field where the horses were out grazing. Except there weren't any horses. Probably in the stables for the night, I reasoned. I shivered again. It was getting awfully cold. I turned right around to head back to my own cabin. It was stupid of me to be out all alone at an obscene hour, I had realized. I needed to get to bed, but when I turned there was something in the middle of the road. Its shape was swallowed up by the surrounding darkness. I could barely make it out. It was tall and thin. I shrugged it off as just a pole or something else and kept walking, but then it moved. I froze. My breath caught in my throat and I could barely breathe. I just imagined that, I said. I just imagined it. I'm freaking myself out. Get your fucking head straight. It moved again. My paralyzed throat managed to squeak out a pathetically weak whimper as my legs began to lose strength. I shivered violently against a cold that was building up inside of me. My eyes began to focus on the impossibly dark figure standing against a barely visible sheet gray night. Now I could see it. It was a person, but like nothing I had ever seen before. Its arms were impossibly long, its legs impossibly short. It had a torso far too long for its rail-thin body, and a head much too big for its stick neck. Its right arm was sticking out to its side, swinging up and down. Its blockish head rolled onto its left shoulder, jerkily twitched up and down, up and down. It didn't move other than that, just stood there twitching, arms jerking up and down, head lolling around its shoulder. I still stood there like a dumb fuck that I was. My cabin was a few hundred yards behind that thing, and I wasn't so stupid as to try to walk past it. My only option was to go around, behind the cabins and the stables, and hope it didn't see me. I forced myself to lift my foot off the ground a step backwards. My flip-flop made a wet smacking sound as it flopped against my feet, and I immediately froze in fear. The thing stopped too. It stood there perfectly straight, perfectly still, listening. I stayed as still as I could. My breath was shallow and panicked, and I tried to force myself to slow my breathing before I started wheezing. My heart thundered in my chest. My whole body was shaking, but I didn't move. Neither did it. I began to slowly, so goddamn slowly, bend over, and I slipped my feet out of those fucking flip-flops. My feet touched the dirt and crumbly gravel, but at least now I could move silently. I spared a quick glance to the side to see where I was going. 2 cabins were immediately to my right. I could slip between them with ease, as there was no visible debris between them. I only looked away for a second. When I turned back, that fucking thing was gone. It was fucking gone. It fucking knew I was there. It was coming for me. Oh, fuck. Yet I still couldn't fucking move. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move no matter how loud my head screamed, "Run! Run! Run, you fuck! Run!" I heard something behind me. I turned instinctively, even though I knew fucking better. I still turned the fuck around. I was greeted with 2 bulging eyes. Oh, fuck, it's eyes. Staring at me unblinking with 2 black pinholes for pupils and an insane smile that was stretched far too wide to be anything remotely human. My paralysis broke as I stared at that fucking thing. I fucking ran, crying my eyes out, trying to scream, but a horrible lead weight in my throat silenced me. My feet pounded on the dirt. I stomped over anything in my way. I even impaled my foot on a sharp motherfucking rock. I didn't care. I just ran. I felt the cold creeping up my back. Oh God, that cold. It was sinking right into my bones, and I couldn't stop shaking or sobbing, and I didn't stop until I burst through the cabin doors, deadbolted the lock, and leaped into my bed. I huddled under the blankets, hiding my head, and there I gasped and shook for breath, and I waited. I didn't sleep that entire night. I was too scared. I couldn't get rid of that chill. All I thought about was that thing, standing there and twitching. Morning finally broke, and I finally allowed breath of relief. Whatever I had seen had not come for me, and now that it was light, it couldn't take me by surprise. Mom noticed my bleeding foot and the blood I tracked through the cabin. I shrugged it off, said I cut myself on the night before, when we were making s'mores. I don't think she believed me, but she didn't push it. We left not longer after that, and as we left, I looked at the place where the thing once stood, and I shuddered again. But there was nothing. I assured myself there was nothing. We said goodbye to the ranchers and to our companions. I noticed a man from Kentucky who said he had thoroughly enjoyed my story. He told me again how much he liked it. Said he was going to tell it to his own kids when he got home. They really liked scary stories, he said. And as we drove away, his head rolled onto his left shoulder, and he smiled a wide, insane smile as he waved us goodbye.
I live on a reservation. I'm almost 19 now. I was 17 at the time, and it's always been a standing rule that we can't leave our house after sunset. There's always been bad things happening. People going missing, animals going missing, animals showing up, and mutilated animals. Weird stuff. I was allowed to have a few friends over for my birthday party. I was really excited because this land is beautiful, and I always like to show it off. 3 of my friends made it up here. 2 boys and a girl. I'll just refer to them as Boy 1, etc. We went for a long walk up the mountain, a little ways from the reservation because the view up there is amazing. And even though it was getting on dusk, I figured we'd be fine. There's 4 of us all in a group together, and we've got hiking sticks with the spears at the end, and it's only about a 20-minute walk there and back. Boy 1 saw the end of a goat, but it was missing a tail and it looked injured. We tried to get closer to see if it was alright, because all the goats around these parts are owned. But as we got closer, it made a really loud low bleat and ran over to the ridge. Boy 1 and I ran off the track after it and looked over the ridge. It disappeared. We stopped so we could hear which direction it was running to, but there was no noise at all. I thought it was a bit weird, and the sun was disappearing faster than I thought, so we started to head back. My friends would always laugh at the rules my family has about going outside at night, but they were about to find out why we have that rule, and I was about to get a fresh reminder. Boy 1 was leading us with his phone light. It wasn't that dark that we couldn't see in front of us, but the trail has drops and rocks, and because of the bushes to the sides of us, it made it really hard to see our feet. There was this giggle in front of us. We stopped because it was really close. It sounded like a turkey gobble, which is uncommon in my area. It happened a few more times after that. The sound gave me goosebumps because it didn't sound right at all. The next thing we saw still plays with my head. Going from left to right across the path was this thing. My heart jumped into my throat. It looked like a large coyote, but its limbs were mutilated like it was crossed between a human with sharp long claws. Its face looked distorted and human, but it was animalistic at the same time, and it had really long teeth. The scariest part is the way it moved. It was rocking back and forth on all fours like a praying mantis. It'd just take a step and rock backwards and forwards, and then lurch another step forward. Its head was bowed down in between its shoulders. None of us moved for what seemed like a couple of minutes, just watching it jolt itself across the path. It looked like it was just going to pass us and then leave us alone, until the girl started crying and freaking out. The animal flung its head in her direction and made a really low growl, but it had the voice behind it as well. It twisted its body around and started coming at us. It was terrifying. I yelled and threw down my spear at its head, but it was like it bounced off. When it got to me, it stood up. It was so tall. It barged into me, making me fall down. It started hiccuping and lurching, and then it barged into Boy 1. It backed into Boy 2, and he landed in a ditch just off of the trail. There was hardly any light on us now. When it got to the girl, it contorted its body over the top of her and held her down. She started screaming. Boy 2 got up and hit it with his hiking pole hard. It jolted away up the path behind us, making a crying noise, almost like it was mocking the girl. It was playing with us. We picked ourselves up and ran as fast as we could back down the path and across the reservation to my place. We told my mom what happened, and she told me and my friends about the legend of the Skinwalkers. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up to a crying sound outside that would stop just as my ears adjusted to being awake. I didn't want to look outside my curtains. I never want to see its face again. The girl said when it was on her, it was hissing in her ear, and it was just whispering things that she didn't understand. I still get nightmares. I'm hoping Wendigo falls under ghost. If not, well, fuck your definitions. 2008, Northern Ohio. My cousins invite me out to go on a camping trip to some hidden state park or whatever, and I happily agree because, hey, Ohio has to be better than Indiana, right? So I drive out to their house and we pack up our tent and food and head out in his truck for a few hours into the boondocks. After miles of twists and turns, the road gets bumpy, and I wake up, and we're off the grid, like dirt road and grass off the grid. We park the truck and head up into the hills for a couple of miles, and make base camp at the top of a hill overlooking a valley with thick trees on the edge across from us. Nightfall comes fast, and around 1 or so around the fire, I ask the park's name where they break out in laughter and say it's not a park, but native land, and we're camping upon some sacred hill. I call bullshit because they name a tribe which at the time sounded legit enough not to argue against. A few minutes later, we hear this scream howl that just drifts across the hills and right to our bones. We all grew up hunting and have been around the country, and we've all had our fair share of animal calls and howls, and none of us could agree upon what it was. If anything, I would say a screaming fox, but deeper, and a wolf because of how it carried. This goes on a few more times, and our laughter soon becomes uneasy and it seems to be getting closer. The fifth scream sounded like it was coming down from in the valley, so we all look over in the direction, and I don't care if you don't believe in this shit, but I do to my death. Out of the fucking tree line, we see what looks like a gangly, thin, naked man, who from this far away seems way too tall for normal. This thing takes off in a sprint on 2 legs at us, and without hesitation, all 3 of us run off the hill and into the woods toward the car. Being night, it only made this escape more terrifying. As we reach the bottom of the hill, we hear the scream again, this time from where our camp was. None of us turn back nor check to see if the others are near us. After the fastest 2 miles in my life, we get in the truck and floor it off the land into the nearest McDonald's where we sit and sat down with no words to each other. We agreed to go back in the morning to grab our things. We do, and to our surprise, nothing had moved or was taken. which seems weird because if someone was fucking with us, they would have trashed the place or at least took a few things. We drove back to my uncle's where we tried to joke about it and just move on. This shit didn't bother me until I saw my friend playing Until Dawn, and I became uneasy in how it looked like what we saw. The shit's real, and it's out there.